Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to tell you how I got over anxiety, got over worrying about anxiety, and basically have come to the point now in life where it doesn't alarm me anymore. Now, I had a good period of time, probably 10 years, 12 years, 14 years, I'm not really sure. Quite a lot of time where anxiety and panic attacks were very alarming to me. And I worried about these things a lot, and I tried to figure out how to not have these feelings, not have these worries, not have not have panic attacks. But it was, incredibly difficult to figure out how not to have anxiety anymore, right? And actually, it's super common. Anxieties, as I'm discovering, as time has gone on, you just start hearing about things more, right? You start talking to people, and it's surprisingly common how prevalent anxiety is amongst people. Like, you don't really think that people have anxiety, but you kind of, and if you're an anxiety sufferer, you might kind of feel like it's kind of embarrassing to have these panic feelings for no reason. That's certainly how I felt when I first started having anxiety. Because somebody who hasn't experienced anxiety has a hard time understanding what anxiety feels like, and just how horrifying it feels, right? Pretty horrifying. It's just kind of coming out more and more, just like a lot of things, I think, human development wise, are coming out more and more as we go on, as we progress as human beings. More and more, of our inner makeup, of our inner psychology, is kind of coming out, being presented, and it's almost like as a species we're working through this condition of being human together in a way. Anyway, so the first thing to know when trying not to have anxiety anymore, there's a few things to know, and I'm just actually going to go through the bullet points of how I eventually figured out, like, how to not let anxiety bother me anymore. And if like, at this point now, it doesn't bother me anymore. Like, I can talk about it and I don't care, and if I were to have a panic attack, I don't care, because I know how to deal with it, right? Because here's the thing, anxiety is most terrifying when you're scared of it. And this is actually one of the triggers for it, and this is one of the reasons that it lingers and lurks in the back of your mind, that you might have an anxiety attack, or you might have a panic attack, or whatever. And this fear of being afraid is actually one of the silliest sort of Ferris wheels of thinking that just keeps anxiety alive and well, right? It keeps it present and occurring in your life. So some of the ways of thinking that really helped me were for example, and for one, the reframe of what anxiety is, right? Now, anxiety, I was honestly afraid that I would have afraid myself to death, right? that these, like, really intense, panicky sensations were going to be the doom of me, right? But that's not how it works, and that's what I eventually realized. That's not how anxiety and panic work. That's not what they're designed to do in our biology. Fear is actually a mechanism of survival, right? It's not a mechanism of death or destruction. It's a mechanism of survival, right? So if you're experiencing fear and anxiety, that's some part of your nervous system being triggered by typically some stressor, some sort of stress in your life, right? Now, it could be a culmination of, like, low levels of ambient stress that you don't really register in sort of the same way that you might register dramatic stress, like a bear is chasing after you and wants to eat you, right? Like that's clear and present stress. And in that sort of situation, your anxiety, panic kicks in, boosts your body with all of this adrenaline and this enhanced speed and strength and whatever, and it preps your nervous system, your body for flight or fight. Basically, it's the flight or fight prepor. But in society, the way it is right now, we don't typically have a lot of bears chasing after us, but that doesn't mean we don't have stress. We do have plenty of stress in disguise. Stress in disguise. Low levels of ambient stress, sort of like if you were to go out for a walk in nature and there would be birds chirping in the background and there might be the wind blowing and there might be crickets. You kind of don't really see or hear those necessarily, but they're there, and if you stop and pay attention to them, you can obviously hear them and make them out with good, clear detail. But typically, these things sort of blend into the background. They're kind of ambient noises. And stress in modern society, in the way the world is kind of configured right now, stress is typically delivered in sort of ambient doses. It's there, it's in the background, but you don't necessarily recognize it. And so what ends up happening is that all of these little stressors start building up, and they're in the back of your mind, somewhere in your subconscious or whatever. Or they might be bigger or whatever, but typically anxiety is kind of confusing because you don't know where the anxiety is coming from. And it's coming from stress. Or it's coming from the fear of anxiety, one of those two things. But typically it starts, the catalyst is stress, right? So all these little stresses in your life eventually build up in the back of your mind where you're not even paying attention to them. You're just watching Netflix or something like that, and you start feeling anxious for some reason. It's like, what happened? What's wrong with me? Why am I feeling anxious for no reason? Like, there's no reason. And you try to talk yourself out of it, and you try to work yourself through that type of thinking, and you try not to feel those uncomfortable feelings that go along with an anxiety panic attack or whatever. But actually there's a lot of things that are probably contributing to your anxiety, right? Like going out to your job day to day, walking around a busy street with cars coming left and right, and you got to pay attention, not walk on the road at the wrong time, or all sorts of strangers walking around, and most of them are probably pretty nice and friendly, but you never know if one of them might be out there without your best interests at heart, or want to rob from you or something like that. You have no idea, right? Like, you don't really know. But our genetic, like our internal wiring, our instinctual wiring is sort of not wired to necessarily automatically trust everything that's going on in our environment, and in particular people, because when we were cavemen. Oops, is my battery out? I think my battery's almost out. I'm going to keep going until it runs out. Okay, so when we were cavemen, trusting a stranger could be dangerous. You had no idea who you were dealing with, right? And that's the same true in society today. You have no idea who people are, who you're dealing with. So to feel totally relaxed and comfortable around people, around automobiles, around the busy hustle bustle of the city, I mean, it's not natural. That's not the way our nervous system is wired. It's not the way that we protect ourselves. That's not the way that we survive. We have a level of stress from all of these things, and that stress contributes to our anxiety and our anxiety attacks. And I think typically people who let these sort of stressors build up in such a way, and perhaps don't necessarily acknowledge their presence and their existence, are perhaps more prone and susceptible to anxiety than people who have found a way to release these stressors, or deal with their stressors, or keep their stressors down to a minimum. But that's one of the things. So if you have anxiety and it feels like it's coming out of nowhere for no reason, first thing to know is that there is a reason, and it's either a direct stress that you Okay, just had a battery outage there. Anyway, So whether or not you recognize where the stressors are coming from or not, the way to, I think, fundamentally deal with the onset of anxiety in life, to kind of attack it at its core, is to look at your stressors and figure out a way to either eliminate many of your stressors, or to at least change the way you think about them in a way that they don't necessarily cause you so much stress, right? Like, you can definitely over worry about things in life that you don't necessarily need to worry so much, and the more you allow yourself to worry about something, obviously the worse it's going to, more that's going to contribute to your stress. But let's assume, though, however, that you're not able to necessarily eliminate your stressors, right? There is actually still a good way to deal with anxiety, and basically it comes down to processing the event of anxiety. It comes down to processing the sensation of anxiety, and here's the key. Okay, so typically when we experience panic and fear and uncomfortable sensations, our first instinct is to try to stop having those sensations, to move away from them, to feel better, to talk ourselves out of them, to distract our minds into something else, or etc. Right? But those things actually don't help. Unfortunately, they don't help. What they do, instead of helping, is they keep our mind engaged in that container, which is the thought, the thought container, which is sort of the reality of anxiety, right? Like, there are times when you don't feel anxiety, and when you don't feel anxiety, chances are you aren't thinking about it at all. You're not trying to not have anxiety, because you're just not thinking about it, you're just feeling fine. You're thinking about other things, right? You're thinking about other things. But if you are actively participating in not feeling anxiety and feeling better, then where is your state of mind actually? Okay, it's not working away from something, it's not working against something, it's working within that thing. It's actually actively keeping your mind within that type of thinking. And thought, of course, I don't know if this is obvious or not, but thought, whether it's obvious or not, is the source of emotion, right? So the things which you feel start with the things that you think. Start with the language of the mind, the visualization of the mind, kind of like watching a movie, right? Like, if you were to watch a scary movie, chances are you'd probably start to feel a little bit freaked out, if it's a good scary movie. You see the sights, you see this, you see the sights, you hear the sounds, you think the thoughts, you create imaginations of the stimulus that's being input, right? Like, we're stimulus creatures. These are our senses, right? We're receiving data on two of our major senses, at least, when we watch a movie, right? And so what's going on in our CPU? What's going on in our processor up here? What sort of thoughts are being formed from our external stimulus, of what the external stimulus of a scary movie? Scary thoughts that lead to feelings of fear. And so, if you don't have to be watching a scary movie to be afraid. If you're thinking scary things, if you're visualizing scary things in your head, if you're having scary conversation with yourself in your head, if you have like a nerve-wracking inner monologue going on, if you have a bunch of worry going on up here, if you're talking to yourself in that sort of way, then you don't have to have a bear chasing you. You don't have to have a scary movie on. You can create that fear response in your nervous system. You can trigger that adrenaline to be released in your body just by thinking the thoughts. Because this is our focusing lens. We pick up stuff from the external, it goes in here, it influences what's going on up here, and then the nervous system responds to the thoughts that are going on, right? So circling back to where I started, when we are participating in the activity of resisting anxiety, of trying to talk yourself out of anxiety, we are actually in the thought of anxiety in some way. Whether we're trying to like not have it or not, we're in it. Okay? So it's counterintuitive, but one of the worst things to do when you're starting to feel anxiety and you don't want to feel anxiety is to try to stop feeling anxiety. That's not a good way to go about it. Can't try to stop anxiety, you'll just build its strength up in that way. You give force, you give power to, by pushing against it, you're actually just creating more force in there, right? Is you're not pushing it away, because you can't push away your own self, like you're dealing with your own self, and you can't push you away from you, because you are always where you are. You are you, right? So you can't push you away from you. You can't get away from you, right? So you just end up creating more force, right, for that, until probably you work yourself into such a state of anxiety that you have a panic attack, and you get that terrifying surge of adrenaline, which doesn't actually have to be terrifying, but I'm going to talk about panic attacks, I think, maybe in a different video. Maybe not, I don't know, I'll talk about this one. But point being that you have to reframe your anxiety response, basically. What is anxiety when you really break it down, right? It's not a life or death situation in the modern world, you know. It's interpreted that way because our nervous systems are not really adapted to this type of world, this modern world. It's interpreted that way, but it's not really that way, right? So there's an overreaction to that sensation, right? So what you have to do, instead of resisting anxiety, instead of pretending it's not there, what you have to do when you start to feel anxiety is you have to feel anxiety. You just have to you just have to be okay with feeling it. Okay? Because anxiety is just a sensation. Right? And then sensation is not dangerous. Right? That's a sensation. It's no different than that. That's a sensation. Cold is a sensation, warm is a sensation. There are all sorts of nuances to the varying types of sensations that our nervous system is capable of generating for us. There's all sorts of sensations. But anxiety is really no different than any other sensation. It might feel a little more intense, but I'm sure you've laughed intensely as well. I'm sure you've been intensely excited, and those things, even though they're at you might have laughed, you may have laughed in your life so hard that you can barely breathe, can't keep your eyes open, you start crying, right? Like, that's an intense amount of sensation, wouldn't you agree? But you don't worry about laughing because it feels good. Still, it's a super intense amount of sensation. You could argue that intense laughter is comparable to intense anxiety, but one feels great and one feels awful. The point is that our nervous systems are designed to deal with intense levels of sensation. And just because you're feeling an intense level of sensation, which we call anxiety, it doesn't mean it's dangerous. It doesn't mean it's harmful. It doesn't mean it's going to hurt you. It doesn't mean you have to try to make it go away. You have to instead, what you have to do is accept that it's there right now. You just have to feel it, observe it, and not worry that it's something worse than it is. Because worrying about those sensations, worrying about anxiety being something worse than it is actually what makes it worse. Actually what makes it feel worse and worse and worse, until you reach a certain level, which is like panic, adrenaline surge. Kind of feels like jumping out of an airplane, probably. I don't know, I've never done that, but I would imagine it kind of feels like jumping out of an airplane. It's like the maximum level of adrenaline panic, right? Your body will eventually hit a maximum, and if it needs to, it will pass you out or something. It'll take over your survival if you're not able to do it yourself. So again, you don't need to worry about this ancient survival mechanism that's programmed into your nervous system, into your psychology, into your instincts, into your very being. You don't need to worry about that survival mechanism hurting you. And when you understand that this that your fear, that your anxiety, those things are not necessarily your enemy. They're not your enemy. You shouldn't have to try to escape them. Those things are your ally. They're just a little confused at the moment. So if something's a little bit confused, the best thing to do is just notice them, right? And think of those things like a sensation. It's no different, right? Think of those things like a sensation. It's no different. I don't know how much more. There's a little bit more to it, right? Like mentally, instead of moving away from anxiety, you should instead try to throw yourself at the wolves of anxiety. Throw yourself at the metaphorical wolves of anxiety. Give yourself to the fear. Right? Give yourself to that sensation. If it strengthens and intensifies, which it probably actually won't, because once you stop feeding the fire, it kind of doesn't really have any fuel to burn on anymore. Once you stop resisting it, the force kind of dissipates, right? And typically what happens when you actually accept the sensation, when you actually allow the fear, and when you actually just are an observer to the sensation, is it actually kind of weakens pretty fast, pretty much always, as far as I've noticed. But even if it didn't, you have to be okay with feeling that feeling right up until the most terrifying part of it, panic, right? And yeah, typically, like I say, when you actually are okay with feeling those feelings, when you're actually okay with accepting those sensations, that's when anxiety stops happening. Almost entirely, for the most part. And if it ever comes up a little bit, you just remind yourself that you're okay with it. You actually emotionally become okay with it, not just mentally, not just with your intellect. You don't just say, I'm okay with it up here, right? This is not the same as being okay with it like here in your heart and your soul and your being. You have to be okay with it, right? You have to really understand that it's not your enemy, that it's your ally, that it's just a sensation, that it's not going to hurt you, right? And when you actually get to this place of acceptance of that sensation, that's actually when it goes away and doesn't really come back anymore. And it doesn't really come back anymore because, like I say, one of the biggest reasons that anxiety even occurs, in humans, is because you have at some point in your life experienced it, you've taught yourself how to have it, and you're afraid of it happening again, right? There's probably, if you have anxiety now, there's probably a time in your life when you didn't, and you didn't even know what it was. You're never afraid of it, and it never happened. Then you may have somehow triggered it, and now you know how to do it. Now you know how to be really scared. And so you by being afraid of it, you're able to create it more easily. It's a ridiculously counterintuitive, self-perpetuating cycle. And this is why it took me so long to figure out personally. And hopefully this video will help you guys figure it out a little bit faster, because this is honestly, for me, this is the distilled version of so much thought and so many different techniques and so much mental energy having gone into all the different possibilities that could be responsible for anxiety and panic, distilled into what finally actually worked for me. And I think it'll work for you too. So hopefully you take some value out of that. Another thing I can teach you there is actually a physiological technique, because mind responds to physiology, physiology responds to mind. They're kind of interconnected. They're interconnected more than kind of. Breathing used to screw me up. Breathing used to really be my catalyst for anxiety and panic. And I've noticed this in other people who also experience anxiety and panic. Their breathing is silly, is what it is. We are taught, I think, in order to relax sometimes by sage gurus or whatever, that when you should take a few deep calming breaths. If you're feeling nervous, or if you're feeling worked up in some way, take a few deep calming breaths is what they say. But actually, when you do that, what you're doing is you're trying to control something that should be automatic. You're trying to exercise control over an automated system, a part of that same system which is responsible for your survival, a part of that same system which is generating the fear. You're trying to control your aliveness. You're trying to be alive on purpose when you don't have to be, because that's all automated. And if you try to be alive on purpose, it really screws up the mojo of being alive, or it screws up the momentum, the rhythm of being alive. Okay, so here's the thing that actually helped for me. Like I said, I used to try to take control of my breath to calm myself down, and I've seen other people do this. Here's a better thing to do. Stop breathing. On the exhale, just give up. Stop breathing like this. Until that happens. What just happened there? My body just detected this nice feeling for a deep breath, right? It took over. It took over my my rhythm, whatever you want to call it. It took that over. My automated survival response kicked in, and it felt good. It didn't, it felt like that breath felt really relaxing. Felt really good, right? Because that's how that's how our bodies are designed. They're designed to live and survive. So a good technique is for a kind of some sort of squelching anxiety, I guess, when you're starting to feel it a little bit, is to give up trying to take control of your life. and one of the best ways to give up trying to take control of your aliveness is to stop breathing. Just, stop breathing. And wait for that natural breath to kick in. It'll automatically relax you, right? And plus, you will put your fate in the hands of your physiology. Your physiology that's designed to keep you alive, right? And you will recognize that it's keeping you alive. And you will gain a little bit more trust for that process. Every time you do that, you gain a little more trust for that ancient mechanism that has got your back, right? It's got your back in this life. It's got your survival figured out. You can go to sleep all night and your survival mechanism will still keep you going. Okay, so, and then the last thing I'm going to mention there is coffee. This was a big one for me. Coffee really triggered a lot of weird physiological responses, like heightened, and accelerated heartbeat, or not maybe a heartbeat, but accelerated adrenals. I don't really know what things coffee particularly spike, but we all know it's a stimulant, right? And if you want to feel relaxed, maybe don't guzzle too much stimulant. And that's another little thing that kind of helps when you're just figuring out. Like I can drink coffee again now. But there was like a lot of years that if I even drank half a cup of coffee, man, it would trigger on my anxiety like that. Terrible. I can do it again now because I'm not worried about if I trigger anxiety, and so it doesn't really have power on me anymore. And so I'm not saying you can't drink coffee. I'm just saying that if this is just another tool for feeling better quicker. And I'm going to add one more thing. Let's talk about your stressors in life. One major stressor, I think, in everybody's life is their health. Do you feel like you are in good health? Do you feel like you're in your best health? And if not, why not? Are you exercising? Are you eating things that you know are good for you? And if not, why not? If you want to eliminate a pretty substantial stressor, take care of your body, right? Take care of take care of your nutritional requirements. Take care of your exercise requirements. That's one major thing that can probably eliminate half of your stress like that. Because if we take good care of our body, in this life, it's going to take good care of us. It's going to give us better signals. It's going to balance our hormones better. It's going to balance all of our levels better, right? So take good care of your health. If you're not doing it right now and you're having anxiety, why aren't you doing it right now? You know, why aren't you taking care of your health? You should be. Everybody should be. Why not? So just do that. Do that. Take good care of your health. Cut back on coffee. Remember to let your body take over on life and survival. You don't need to worry about it yourself. When you try to control your breathing, what you end up doing is you kind of put yourself into a hyperventilated state, and it feels funny. You feel kind of lightheaded. You feel kind of, anxious, honestly, because you're trying to relax yourself with these deep coming breaths, but you're getting too much oxygen. And that's the funny thing about it. So what you need to do is, like I said, stop breathing. Let your body breathe for you. It will do it exactly when you need it. Just like it'll tell you you're thirsty through this mechanism called thirst. When you're thirsty, when you need to drink some more water, right? Like that's a great mechanism that's programmed into our bodies for when we're thirsty, when we're hungry, when we need another breath, etc., etc., etc. It's all automated. It's all on autopilot. So, yeah, I think that's it. I'm going to save the talk about panic attacks for a different video, I think, because it's comparable to the talk about anxiety, but a little bit more, a little bit of nuance there, but it's kind of the same thing, you know. It's accepting the sensation. It's feeling the sensation no matter how intense it gets. It's riding that sensation. And it's allowing the fear to be there until it dissipates, because it always dissipates. And it'll dissipate really quickly when you stop throwing fuel on the fire, when you stop trying to not have it, when you stop worrying about it. It dissipates super quickly. Anyway, that's this video. I hope this helps some people. You know, honestly, like I said, this is a lot of years of me trying to figure out, all these different techniques, like what could, going back into my childhood and like trying to figure out past traumas and trying to figure out, energy healing and all these different things, meditation, whatever. It's like, what will actually help me not feel anxiety anymore? And for me, this is what it is. And hopefully, hopefully you can find the idea that I'm using, like I say, my words right now to transfer into your brain. Because there is a subtle difference, a fairly significant subtle difference, between hearing something and processing it as words, as knowledge, and actually having that, I suppose, emotional understanding, mental emotional understanding of these things. So if this doesn't necessarily work for you right away, it's because maybe you haven't fully accepted it. You haven't fully accepted that it's okay to have fear. You just have the idea that it's okay to have fear and you're talking yourself into it, but you haven't fully done it here. So like anything else, this technique I think will take practice. Maybe you'll be able to figure it out right away, and that would be awesome. But if not, practice it. I think it'll work for you. Works for me. Oh, and one final thing. Since we're on the topic of, like I say, what we think, what we feel is what we think. A really sometimes useful thing is a really sometimes, so useful sometimes. Like it's really sometimes useful. A really sometimes useful thing is changing your movie. Change your movie up here. Like I already told you once that it's not a good idea to try to distract yourself or move away from the anxiety, because that kind of creates a fear of it, creates energy for it. But there is a different way to move away from it, which is sort of not moving away from it. It's kind of nuancy, but like I say, one thing that has honestly helped me sometimes is just to kind of sit still, put my hands on my chest like this, and just tell myself I love me, right? I love me. I love me. I love me. And continue with I love me. Pay attention to your tone. Pay attention to the emotion behind your thoughts, your words. And I love me. If you get into the thought of I love me, you'll probably start feeling better from that too, because you're just changing the movie in a fairly effective way. I love me is a pretty powerful mantra, but that's not actually what I recommend as a way to really deal with your anxiety. The only way to really truly effectively deal with it is to accept it, to take it, to feel it, to not eventually learn how to not worry about it. But if you're struggling with that, the I love me's might also make you feel better to a level where you can better put into perspective dealing with fear in a brave way. You know what I mean? Being brave in the face of fear. That's kind of what it is. It's being brave in the face of fear. I'm not saying you're not brave because you're feeling fear, but it's like deciding to do bravery in the face of fear. If the wolves are chasing you, right, and you can't run away, because eventually you'll just tire out and they'll catch you and they'll eat you, right? Eventually that's what will happen with anxiety. It'll eventually catch you. So your only option really sometimes is to be brave in the face of fear. Turn and face it, look at it, feel it, acknowledge it, and deal with whatever it brings you. And if you can get into the mindset of dealing with whatever fear brings you, you will have conquered it. That's all there is to it. You will have conquered it. Alright? Cheers! Hope you like this video. Subscribe to the channel. And I'll have kind of more similar stuff to this in the near future. Cheers.